A brief geographic history of the Old Testament. The Israelites are enslaved in Egypt by the Pharaoh, and God tells Moses to save them because they're meant to go to the Promised Land, Canaan. So he does. Moses leads the Israelites through the desert while Pharaoh and his army chase them, and he parts the Red Sea to lead them to safety. Their next goal is to get to Mount Sinai. They set up camp in Rephidim and prepare the journey to Mount Sinai when the Amalekites, a nomadic tribe, attack them. This is the famous battle where Moses raised his hand and the Israelites were winning, and when he lowered his hand, the Amalekites were winning. In the end, the Israelites prevailed and continued on to Mount Sinai. They get the 10 Commandments, and now their journey gets a bit fuzzy, but we do know that they went all the way north to Kadesh Barnea. At Barnea, they send 12 spies, one from each tribe, to scout out the land of Canaan. Well, so how was it? Dude, I mean, the land is hella good, but they're like all 7 foot. We're not gonna win this. Wow, these guys have no faith. I shouldn't let any of them to the Promised Land. They must all die. Their next generation will be blessed. Because of their lack of faith, God commands them to wander the wilderness for 40 years to ensure that none of them reach the Promised Land and only the next generation do. They begin their journey to the Promised Land. They route through the hill countries of Edom and Moab, most likely to avoid the Amalekites near southern Canaan. Once there, they begin their first major military conquest, although it initially wasn't meant to be. Moses asked Sihon, king of the Ammonites, to allow them to pass through their land peacefully. Sihon, being a bright young fellow, declined and mobilized his army. Moses led the Israelites into Heshbon, the capital, defeating Sihon. Shortly after, they venture north. King Og of Bashan comes with his army to defend the city of Erdrei. The Israelites utterly destroy Og and his army. There were no survivors. They quickly move north, occupying Astaroth, and shortly after, the rest of Bashan. Here, things calm down a bit. Moses and the bulk of the Israelites camp out in the plains of Moab for about a year. Moses dies, gets buried at Mount Nebo, near Heshbon, and Joshua becomes the new military leader of the Israelites. Right after the mourning period of Moses ended, they crossed the Jordan River. This next battle is possibly the most well-known biblical conquest, the fall of Jericho. The Israelite army marched around the walls of Jericho for 6 days, blasting trumpets. On the 7th day, Joshua says, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city," and the walls come crashing down. That day, the city and everyone in it was completely destroyed. This marks the first city captured by the Israelites in the Promised Land. After this astounding victory, Joshua marches on to the city of Ai. Initially, they only sent 3,000 soldiers to take the city, vastly underestimating the enemy. Israel is swiftly defeated, and Joshua devises a new plan. He sends 30,000 troops to hide behind the city of Ai. They wait until dusk, and the main army in the front baits the enemy out of the city. Once all the enemy troops have vacated the city, the ambush forces swoop in from behind, setting the city on fire. They then rush out of the city to pincer the confused army of Ai. No one was spared. Gibeon is near, but unlike most encounters with Canaanites, Joshua and the Israelites agreed to a peace treaty with the Gibeonites. During this time, the Israelites occupied the rest of central Canaan, living off the land and building altars. But the Israelites' peace with Gibeon angered the 5 southern kings of the Amorites. They formed an alliance and marched to attack Gibeon. When Joshua caught wind of this, he immediately rallied his forces to defend the city. The battle at Gibeon was fierce, but the Lord, fighting alongside Israel, brought hailstones from the sky, devastating the Amorite forces. And then, a miracle occurred. The sun stayed in the skies longer than usual, allowing Israel to finish the battle by daylight. This was a sweeping victory for the Israelite and Gibeonite forces, and the 5 kings fled the land. However, Joshua did not stop. Turning the defensive battle into a full-on southern Canaanite invasion, he pursued them. The 5 kings, desperate to escape, hid in a cave, but Joshua's men discovered their hiding place. Joshua immediately set his eyes on Hazor, a northern city near the Sea of Galilee. The northern Canaan campaign would be the largest military advance Joshua had ever conducted. Jabin, king of Hazor, had formed a massive coalition of kings to stop Joshua's advance. He described their horses, chariots, and soldiers as being as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Joshua launched a surprise attack just west of Hazor. Despite the vast quantity of enemy Canaanites, Israel prevailed, burning the city of Hazor to the ground, while also hamstringing the horses and destroying the chariots. This marks the beginning of the Israelite settlement in the land of Canaan. After the battle, Joshua helped divide the land among the 12 tribes, and after he died, Israel didn't appoint a new national leader. Instead, they slipped into a chaotic era known as the period of Judges, a time when the Israelites would fall into sin and suffering, and then, by divine intervention, a judge would be chosen to save the Israelites. This happened because Israel failed to fully drive out the Canaanites, and subsequently fell into their sinful nature. So God wanted Israel to learn their lesson by letting enemy nations rise up to test and humble them. A major enemy force, the Philistines, invaded from the west and stuck around for years. That's where the judge Samson comes in. He failed to fully drive out the Philistines, but he did burn their crops, kill numerous Philistine soldiers, and, in his final act, he collapsed a Philistine temple, killing himself and 3,000 soldiers. Then came the Amalekites and Midianites, who didn't conquer, but raided and plundered like crazy, stealing crops and livestock until the judge Gideon pushed them back with just 300 men. Meanwhile, the Ammonites invaded from the east and occupied Gilead. The judge Jephthah would try but fail to drive them out. They would succumb to Saul later on, though. For 300 years, the Israelites endured, but they could take no more. The people finally say, "We want a king." Samuel arises as the last judge and prophet, and Saul is chosen to be the king of the Israelites. Saul, being a strapping young fellow, goes over to the Ammonites in Gilead with 330,000 soldiers, which was absolutely and utterly unnecessary. The Israelites strike at dawn, and they absolutely wallop them, scattering their army so bad that no two of them were left together. After this resounding victory, Saul is ordered to wipe out the Amalekites completely, every man, woman, child, and livestock. He gathered 210,000 men and attacked southward, destroying every city in their sight. This was a decisive Israelite victory. However, Saul made two big mistakes. He spared King Agag of the Amalekites and kept the best of their livestock, which went against God's command of clearing everything out. Saul comes back and is like, "Yo, peep this victory." And Samuel isn't happy because Saul disobeyed the Lord's command, so God rejected Saul as king, and Samuel personally executed King Agag. David secretly becomes God's chosen king, and Saul tries to kill him, but Saul dies in battle later on. He actually kills himself, but I digress. David rules a united Israel. He recaptures Jerusalem from the Jebusites, and then he dies. His son Solomon becomes king. He does some stuff, builds some altars, and he also dies. And then his son Rehoboam becomes king, and the northern tribes ask him for lower tax and less labor, and he said no. So 10 of the northern tribes rebelled and anointed Jeroboam as king, who is actually not related to Rehoboam. The southern kingdom of Judah's capital is Jerusalem, while the kingdom of Israel's capital is Samaria. This little guy, Aram Damascus, as many nations wanted back then, wanted land and power. So the natural solution would be to invade the closest nation to them, Israel. The subsequent Aramean invasion completely humiliated Israel. Their army was reduced to 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 soldiers, and nearly wiped out the kingdom of Israel altogether. During this time, Edom and Egypt constantly raided and plundered the kingdom of Judah, resulting in a significant loss of territory. Now, you might be wondering, what's that little purple spot up there? That, my friend, is the Assyrian Empire, one of the most powerful empires in ancient history. Known for their military innovations and sieges, no one dared set foot on their territory. Assyria wanted to expand their empire, and Aram Damascus was the next target. Aram and Israel were so terrified of an Assyrian invasion, they formed a temporary alliance to try and fight it off. Nevertheless, Assyria completely swept northern Israel and around Damascus. They put Damascus under siege, and the king of Aram was executed, and the city was plundered. The region was divided into Assyrian provinces, but the Arameans possessed no more political power. Over the next 20 years, Assyria would annex Israeli territory near the Sea of Galilee and slowly creep up to Samaria. When they arrived, they sieged the capital for 3 years. In the end, Assyria took over Israel and pestered Judah for a while. And at this point, all you need to know is that the Babylonian Empire was growing, and they didn't plan on stopping. And at around 600 BC or so, Jerusalem falls to the might of the Babylonian Empire.